How many people were at the, where's the volume? How many people were at the security session this morning that Matt did? So a few people. Okay, great. This is actually kind of nice. This will actually be, oh, there's Matt there. The complementary to that. A lot of the, I think, common stuff I had to cut out, or we don't go into that much detail on this one here, so that should be pretty good there. So we'll go and get started. It looks like 11:45, and since we only have half an hour, I'm going to be kind of going through things pretty fast. I'm going to really try to concentrate on the why we need to do this, and then the what. Obviously, the how is going to be kind of hard because with just a half an hour here. But we're going to talk about security, continuous security validation in your CI/CD pipeline. My name is Mike Douglas. Just a real quick thing about me, solution consultant for Deliveron. We're in Omaha, Nebraska. There's some contact information for me if you have any questions. There's our blog. I try to blog stuff on there once or twice a week, just about different things around DevOps and security there. So we'll get started here. So hopefully today, what I'm hoping to kind of get through is really address security from the development process all the way through to production. Really talking about how we can prevent some of the top 10 OWASP vulnerabilities, and then automate our security validation as part of our CI/CD pipeline. So before we get into that, let's quickly talk about what's the typical problem. So we've got developers and we've got infrastructure. So one of the, I think, key things, and as a developer for over 20 years, I think historically, we've really thought of security as more of an operations issue. I'd say probably the first 15 years, I hardly had to deal with security at all. It was more because we were always building internal applications. It's really probably more the last 5, 7, 10 years that really have cared more about security. The other piece, oops, I wasn't gonna show that yet. Is for the infrastructure standpoint, they've always been really good at actually building a strong outer shell of a security, but then what happens when that outer shell is broken? Just like an egg, right? There's not much behind it. So the real kind of key goals here that I want to try to convey is that it's really everyone's responsibility for security, and again, all the way through the process. And then we really want to treat security in a layered approach. So if there's any kind of front door to get through, that if they get through that one, there's another door right behind it that they have to get through. So we'll talk about some techniques for that here. So why has this gotten to be a lot bigger deal? Well, I mean, every week you're hearing about new security breaches. And I'm pretty sure if you're a CIO, CSO, you don't want your name to be up here as the next culprit. So security has really become heightened. And a lot too, because I think we're building a lot more applications today that are public facing. There's a lot of organizations that want to take what they're doing internally and figure out like new revenue streams and that type of stuff. So we're now building applications more publicly than we've ever done before. There's also this movement of like digital transformations that organizations are going through to really help. They're wanting to more streamline their processes to go from waterfall to agile to even DevOps practices. So we don't have that time anymore at the end to really do those security checks and things like that. So we need a process that's incorporated through the entire life cycle. So real quick, just talking about another challenge of it is applications are being built differently today than ever before. Our modern applications, usually somewhere centered around a web application. We have to build it to support multiple platforms. So from a security standpoint, that's some additional challenges there. Like I mentioned already, it's publicly facing, so a lot of challenges around the internet. Most of our applications we're talking external sources, and that's probably even more at risk because that's really where our data is and where the overall IP of the company is. So we need to make sure our applications are secure across those multiple layers. We're building more like desktop-like applications in the web. So we're using SPA frameworks, which basically, like although the JavaScript's downloaded to our browsers, and we have the source code there, so anybody can get into it, and that introduces some additional security challenges. Things like single sign-on, always available. A lot of organizations are leveraging the public cloud, which can be more secure, but also can be more of a challenge because you are publicly facing by nature. And then the applications are not just on-prem or just in the cloud anymore. We have a lot of hybrid solutions. So we need to make sure that the application is secure all the way from the web down to our on-prem sources. So what makes an application secure? So we're only going to be talking about one of these today, and that's really the continuous validation. But it starts with having the secure infrastructure and making sure that our application can be hosted somewhere that is in a secure facility. We need to make sure the application is being built in a secure way. But we can't just say, okay, we're certified good now with our application, because the next check-in could change everything. So we need to be making sure we're validating that across every single code change there. And then once we're in production, we need to be monitoring the application. Even if we're not making changes, the attackers trying to get in are constantly changing the way they're attacking us. So these 4 together really can help make sure you have a secure application there. So I'm going to briefly go through the other ones. Just not a lot of time here. We'll have to go through these couple quickly. There's a few slides I had to cut out, unfortunately, so as you probably know, there are more things than just the ones I'm going to be calling out today. So the first thing from the infrastructure is making sure we have secure physical controls, because we can build the most secure application in the world, but if it's hosted on a laptop in my basement, all somebody has to do is walk into my basement, grab it, and now they've got it. So again, we need to have these kind of controls here. Encryption is really important. We need to make sure we have our data is encrypted at rest and then also at transit. So one of the key things is through SSL and TLS to make sure that we are always using HTTPS. One thing to keep in mind is not all SSL and TLS configurations are the same, so it depends on what you're allowing with those. There's a site called SSL Labs that will actually give you a rating of what your site is. And one of the interesting things is we did it once for a client. You can see everything we're doing looks pretty good, but we're getting an F. And the reason for that is because this database is actually smart enough to know that our cert was being used somewhere else, actually on an ADFS server. And there they were allowing like some real low versions of SSL. So that's why we got the F rating. So they fixed it on there, we reran it, now we got the A. But just kind of interesting to know that, it's good to check that too. The other things from an infrastructure standpoint, again, I'm going to go through this pretty fast. Web application firewalls can help do detection or prevention of OWASP top 10 things. So if somebody's trying to hit you with an injection, SQL injection attack, it'll actually alert you and say, hey, somebody's getting in, or we can actually prevent them. And the other thing is the distributed denial of service attacks. A lot of services now, like if you have your application hosted in the cloud, a lot of the cloud providers can support or basically provide you that kind of DDoS protection, so you won't be susceptible to those kind of attacks. So that's really quick on the infrastructure side. Obviously, once we have that in place, we need to make sure applications are being built in a secure way. So how do we do that? I mentioned this at the very beginning. The one real key takeaway from this, there's a lot of stuff up here, is layers. I think that's really the key, and one of the things that we're really trying to do from trying to keep people out is even if somebody gets into a certain point, that they can't get any further without breaking some other rule or some other security control that we have in place. But first and foremost is identity. That's really become the central focal point of security today. But then we having to go through, like if we knew where our customers are coming from, we could whitelist. We have a WAF in there to prevent OWASP top 10. Logging, I know that's been a key thing I've heard a couple times today already, is making sure that we have logging all the way through this. Because if we do have somebody get in, we really need to figure out what they got access to, or we almost have to assume they got access to everything. So we want to make sure we have logging all the way down through there in case there's a breach. And then all the way down to the database level, making sure we're encrypted at that. So really, again, a lot of stuff on here, but again, just having those different types of security mechanisms so that every single layer is secure and we can make sure that they can't get access to everything. Here's also the app architecture. So one key thing about building the application is really educating the developers. So it's one thing to make sure that we're preventing this stuff with some tools, but it's also going to be a lot better if we can just prevent them altogether by training the developers. OWASP is basically an open, it's basically a group out there that is just there to help make secure web applications. And they have a lot of tools and a lot of resources that you can leverage. So in this case, we have OWASP cheat sheets. They have the OWASP top 10, which explain the most common vulnerabilities out there. And the report that this comes in actually is like, 30 or 40 pages full of information of those types of rules. The cheat sheets are really nice because they have all different languages, whether you're doing Java, Python, C#. They have these cheat sheets to help developers know like what's good and what's not good there. And there's a quick link on that. Mentioned already too, identity is really kind of that central focal point. It's really become the new firewall, if you will. So one of the key things here is if you're building an application, you don't have to store the user credentials, let's not do it at all. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. We can federate with different identity providers. If you're building some sort of social application, we can leverage like Facebook, Google for those. If we're using enterprise, there's a lot of different enterprise providers out there that provide identity and federation with those. So we don't have to actually store the passwords. We're really just doing that federation. The other important piece is MFA. And one of the things I didn't get a chance to include in here was just least privilege. So we want to make sure that you only have access to what you need. And if you do need access to more than the average user, making sure that you include some sort of like two-factor, multi-factor authentication so that if somebody does get access to a password, they still have to have the other thing to be able to get in. All right, so now we have a secure infrastructure. We're building the application in a secure way, but we want to make sure that as we're doing check-ins and pushing to production very early and often, that we can ensure that we have this. So we want to do this by using what's called continuous validation. So in that case, this is just a diagram I put together to really explain how from our development environment all the way through to production that we can make sure our applications are secure. So even from when we're developing the application, there's a lot of tools that can help make sure that give you that feedback to know if you're building secure applications. We can do static code analysis rules for security, code reviews as part of our pull request process. We can make sure we're always doing work or always doing code changes that are related to work. But those types of things we can get before we even check in our code till it's in the master branch. So once we have that then in kind of our master, there's a number of things we can do as part of our CI process or continuous integration. There we can rerun the same rules that we're running locally. One of the other key things, and this is one of the top 10, is using third-party libraries. So we can be building the most secure application in the world, but if we're using a NuGet or NPM package of some third party and theirs isn't secure, well now all of a sudden our application is not secure. So that's a really big important thing. So one of the things, and there's a number of tools, but the one I'll show here is a white source, and it'll actually scan the packages that we're using and let us know if we're using versions that we shouldn't be using. We can have our unit tests and code metrics too to make sure we're all doing secure things and what we're supposed to be doing. So again, that's all feedback we can do. So even though we've checked it into master, nothing's yet been deployed. So if we're failing any of these things, we can kind of stop the project into its tracks. Now maybe let's say we have automatic deployments to dev. Once our application is deployed to dev, we probably want to do some additional testing there to make sure our application is good. So that's where we can actually do some of the pen testing or dynamic testing, it's called sometimes. And that's really where we can hit against the live website and actually see if there's issues. And what I'll show here in just a couple minutes is how we can actually do that with every single check-in. And then also like we could be rerunning our regression tests, performance things, all those things. They're not directly tied to security, but in a way, if our application times out or something like that, it could expose some things that we might not want to see. So here, as part of our CI process, we're actually doing what's called a passive scan. In that case, it's not actually trying to change and try to attack your site. It's just checking all your requests and responses to see if everything looks secure. And I'd say probably the biggest thing that this checks is to make sure you're not giving out information that you don't really need to. Like probably most of our first vulnerabilities with this were identified were things like saying what kind of server that we're using. It would show like, because we're doing like a Windows server, so it was like IIS, and it said, hey, don't give them that, because now if I'm an attacker, instead of having to use all my tools, I know you have an IIS server, now I only have to use my IIS tools to try to attack you. So a lot of these security things aren't just like saying that there's something bad you have, but you're just giving too much information. You're just too nice or too friendly. So you just want to kind of close your doors and not give out any more information than you have to. So you get a lot of those failures right off the bat that are pretty easy to fix just through how your pages are coming back with like the headers and stuff that you'll see in the responses. I mentioned how the SSL scanner, they have APIs. We can call that directly through our CI/CD process. Unfortunately, with that one, they don't allow third parties to do that. So you'd have to like build your own and do it, but you can't like build a product and give it to other people. And then the infrastructure scan, I'll talk about that a little bit too, how we want to make sure that's being done. And we'd want to repeat those then down the environments depending on if we have different data, those types of things. But all this would happen during our check-in, and hopefully this would happen within like 10 or 20 minutes. And that's one of the big reasons why I have this passive pen test up here. Whereas when we get down to kind of a nightly run, that's where we'll do more of our long running processes. We can go back through and run a full active pen test, which is gonna fire off SQL injection attacks. You can do fuzz attacks, which basically like going through every like username, password combination, or it can do dynamic stuff to figure out, do you have any vulnerabilities there? It can go through all of those and try to find more, but those obviously take a lot longer. And we don't wanna hold up our application CI/CD pipeline process, but at least we'll always have the results from the last day, which is, I'd say, probably 99% better than I've ever had in the past. So that's why I felt like that's pretty good there. All right, so you're about 15 minutes out. So the next thing is the static code analysis tool. So we'll go into a little bit of detail about some of those steps there. If you are using like SonarQube or SonarLint, they have some of the security tools in there. Also, if you're Microsoft shop, there's some of the Roslyn analyzers that work inside Visual Studio that can actually analyze for security rules there. And then there's a third-party product called Checkmarks. I don't know, does anybody use that at all here? Okay, a couple of people. So that's a tool that can actually integrate into your IDE and provide some checking at the third party to actually give us that security testing. And it'll actually like identify dependency injection and show you exactly like where in the code it would detect that at. So another good check to there. But this is a much more expensive product, obviously, than the free ones that are kind of included with that. But definitely good. The other big piece was the open source vulnerabilities. I already mentioned, we're susceptible to having vulnerabilities even if our code doesn't. WhiteSource is one of the companies out there that provides tools for identifying this. They have a free product now called Bolt. This is for if you're a Microsoft shop and you have a VS subscription, it'll actually run as part of your builds, and they give you basically a 6-month license. But if you have, all you need is more than one developer to cover the whole year. But essentially what that gives you is the report there to see, and you can see, okay, well, we've got issues. Most of our stuff's pretty good. We have 7 where we're not good, and then some of there. I'll show you the live one here in just a minute when we get to the demo part. So that's basically on the CI part. Now if we're talking about how we can actually do pen testing, we wanted to use a tool called OWASP. Has anybody heard or used OWASP before? Oh, great. If you have there. So if you haven't used it, it's basically an open source tool that OWASP builds, and it's a pen testing tool. And it works really good all the way for just learning about pen testing and security testing, all the way up to using it as professional. And there's been some studies where they've gone it up against commercial tools and other tools, and it does a pretty good job compared to that. But it's free, and it's a great way to get started. And the other piece is we can actually integrate it into our software delivery pipeline, because they have the installer that you can install, but they also have it delivered on a container. So that's what we're going to show here, how we can actually integrate it into the SDP. So what we're leveraging is we're using Azure Container Services, but you could use anywhere you want to host it, on-prem, anything like that. I'm using Docker Swarm, but you could easily use Kubernetes or anything like that. I just picked Swarm because it's real simple, and I don't need all the overhead of Kubernetes to do this. And then the actual image comes on a Docker image. And I'll show you, there's multiple versions I'll show in just a minute with that. But here's kind of the process we have for CI and how it integrates. So here's what we typically do. We do a build, we do our security scan for the static code. We'll package up the application, we'll deploy it, and then we'll run our passive pen test. And as part of what this does is it pulls down the OWASP weekly build. So basically every single week they're releasing a new version of this. So if there are new things that they're fixing from a vulnerability standpoint, we'll get those right away and know about them. We'll go ahead and start that container. We'll run the baseline scan, which can run about 1 to 2 minutes. We'll capture back the results. And then what we do is actually, this is a piece I built into VSTS, Visual Studio Team Services, or the cloud version of TFS, if you're not familiar with that. But basically it takes the report and generates bugs in there. So we actually have something actionable that the development team can work on, and we can track those and even see if things are coming up over time, multiple times, and potentially even identifying if a developer keeps doing the same thing over again. Might be a learning opportunity for them. So that's kind of what we do from a CI process. And again, this whole piece, this only adds like 1 or 2 minutes to it. So well worth the time to give us that peace of mind. So then I mentioned as part of the nightly build, and what we can do is actually scale this out across multiple environments. We're going to do almost the same exact thing, except we're going to actually spider the site because we want it to go try to hit all the pages. And not only can we just spider the site, but we can actually use like automated tests to help us spider the site and then run what's called the active scan. Again, that's going to actually try to attack the site and do those SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, and anything else we want to configure it to run. We'll still get back the results, and then we'll make sure that if we get any high bugs, we'll fail the overall release. Otherwise, we'll just create bugs and have the dev team work on them. One other thing I just wanted to call out here is, you see I have the same app twice. I want to test it 2 different ways. A lot of times we're putting in a web application firewall. Like I said, that'll help prevent attacks on like the like OWASP top 10. So what I want to do is actually have that configured to run. And that's great because that's how our end users are hitting it. So that's ultimately how we're protected. But then I'm really only testing the WAF at that point, which is, ultimately that's what I need to do. But I also want to make sure our application code is good. So I've actually got the application deployed without the WAF, and we'll actually hit it with that too to just make sure that there's no security issues so we can verify that the app's good. Because technically, if our code was perfect, we wouldn't really need a WAF because we wouldn't have any security vulnerabilities. So that's why I want to make sure both's in there just to give us that full coverage. Because I don't want to completely depend on this and then have an issue with the WAF and somebody gets into our site. Let's cover it on both sides. So this is what that integration looks like. And I'll do a quick demo here at the end just to kind of show. But you can see this is the release. Creates the issues or the failed tests. And then what I do is create those bugs. The other piece of this, I'm not showing I guess here, but I'll show in the demo, is that it's taken the report that comes back from WhatsApp and attaching it to the release so I can get all the additional details, and I'll show that here. And then one thing we've done is we've actually just put it out on GitHub. So you can go out there and take a look at it. It's really, and download it and use it however you'd like. There's one piece, there's the part that does all the OWASP and gets the report. That can be used for anything. It's not VSTS specific. Then there's the one piece of the code that is VSTS specific. So if you're using like Jira, Jenkins, or something like that, you just have to figure out a different way to pull that data in. But definitely you could reuse the other part of it and leverage that. So that's kind of the piece with the validation. All right, so then the other piece of this that we also did was we wanted to make sure, because we're leveraging the public cloud, and we wanted to make sure things weren't being deployed out there in a way that was insecure. Most of the public clouds have some tools, like Azure has Security Center that we'll talk about in a minute, and some other ones that can report on this. But this was more from a business rules standpoint. Security Center is not going to know if something's supposed to be public or not supposed to be public. So this was a way that we could basically define our public endpoints. And then if it detects anything else, it'll basically fail. And we can go across the different resources there and make sure things are being scanned. It started as kind of a port scanner, but then as we got a little more smarts to it and it's different resources, it's kind of grown over time. Like SQL Server is more looking at it from a firewall standpoint. By that, you basically have ports or IPs you can define that are supposed to be public. We've got it in here. These are the only ones that it should be. And if it detects any other ones, then it would give us an error. All right, so let me do a quick demo here. Let's see, we got about 10 or 7 minutes. I just want to show a couple of these components. So the first one, here's that GitHub repo that we have created. There's the overall. The scripts in here is where the tool is the part that's VSTS specific. The script is PowerShell, but it could run on any platform with a new there. And then this is basically the script that can pull down the image, run the OWASP app, and then generate the results. So that's out there for that. The piece with the build, this is again is VSTS. So this is kind of our online tool, or Microsoft's online tool for managing things all the way from your work to code, repositories. It has the build and release in there, and then also the testing hub. So all those pieces in there. The part we're really concerned about is the build and release. They have a web-based build system now. In this case, this is our CI build results. You can see we've got our unit tests coming back. Here is the static code analysis rules coming back failed. If we wanted to, we could actually fail the whole build here with this. But for the most part, I usually just like to alert the developers to have those get fixed. And then the one piece up here is the white source bolt. So when we click over to here, it'll actually give us the report of the scan. I knew I was going to do that. I just did that earlier this morning, and I should have just left the screen. Well, it looks just like the screenshot. Wow, I cannot believe that. never fails. Anyway, so that looks just like the screenshot I showed, but it'll show the report. Again, it's for a 6-month license there. So, so that will give you that for that. The OWASP piece, here's what it looks like in the release. Here we're deploying our infrastructure, our web apps, our APIs. Now that we have our application deployed, we're gonna run the pen test, attach the report to that, and then bring back any of the alerts. With the results of that then, we'll actually create the bugs, and then we can work those through, any like the Kanban board or any backlogs. These don't start with a ton of data in there, but again, we have that report, which I can come in here, and you can see down here I have the report generated from the OWASP results, and then you can see what the different alerts that we have. So we have one high, one medium, and we can see what those different ones are. This is pretty nice because it'll actually give you a way to remediate those and a lot of additional information here. You can see we've got some of the medium ones, overflow, cross-site scripting. So a lot of things. Some of these are just ones we need to add to our response headers or remove from those response headers so they don't actually get flagged anymore. But those are the results with that one there. The OWASP I mentioned is a container. This is out just in the hub.docker.com. And here's basically where I'm pulling it down from in the release. They have a stable version, which basically is only updated when there's major releases or I guess major fixes. But there's that weekly version, and that's the one we're using that gets updated every week. There's one more, probably down here, which is real time, almost on a daily basis. We didn't want to really get that one because we don't want to be fixing their bugs. Do we just want to, this one's been fairly stable. I think only once over probably the last few years that we've been running this, we've run into an issue where we had to kind of hard code it to a specific version. But for the most part, that's the best one there with that. So let's see, we've got about 4 minutes and I'll kind of wrap up with just the monitoring side of it. So again, I mentioned, we put in the security validation. This is great for us, we're doing development. But what about protection or production? Who's protecting us there? And that's where we really want to incorporate monitoring. That's a really important piece. We're leveraging Azure in this case, but it doesn't matter if you're using one of the other clouds. They're going to have ways to monitor that there. So really think about security as a living and breathing thing. Make sure that really kind of go through some kind of threat analysis as assume breach and really understand how far can they get. How can they get into those? And really figure out where is your risk level and risk level that you're willing to take. Because I mean, you could, obviously there's no limit on how much you could spend for security there. But really have a plan for how you are gonna try to detect issues coming in, what's gonna be the plan for preventing them, and then what happens if something actually, somebody does get in. What's our remediation plan of how to get them either isolated or out of the site, but try to get them identified as much as possible. So some of the tools that we can use through Azure, and again, there's other tools like Datadog out there, that I know is one of the sponsors here, and other ones that have kind of these anomaly detections. But these are really nice. Let's say we had all of our users coming in from Iowa, and then all of a sudden somebody shows up in some other country into our application. Well, because this has been logging that the entire time, it's smart enough to know and say something's not right here. And we'll give you an alert and say, hey, we detected something that's not normal. And there's a lot of different anomaly detections that it supports, but basically can give you those alerts in addition to alerts you should be creating already. But it's nice when Microsoft's kind of using some of their own like AI tools to help us with security there, and other vendors too. The other piece is Security Center. So this is another one that will go through all the resources that we have provisioned in the cloud, and we'll identify things that we're not doing. Like you can see there's some flags on the storage. Let's say we don't have encryption turned on for the databases. It'll tell us that. And then most of the time it'll give us a nice little button too to remediate it, and click that and then it's good to go if it's pretty easy there. So that's really kind of ends that full circle then, and then really to provide us our full application. So I just have, a couple things is you can go out to OWASP.org, pull down any of this information. There's the top 10. 2017 has been released fairly recently out there. If you're Microsoft, you can use White Source Bolt. Looks like I need to go back out there and get my updated key on that one. And then this is an article I posted, or had Microsoft posted that I wrote, basically covering a lot of the same exact stuff. It's out there on docs.microsoft. You just search for like CI/CD pipeline. You can find it out there. Here's the link to our plugin that we have for OWASP with that. And then just some additional resources there of some good nuggets, I guess, found on OWASP. And there's a lot of really good stuff out there. So I know we have 1 minute, and I'm here. I'm in no hurry to get to lunch. I know I never like being the person in between everybody's lunch. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Anything? Does anybody have anything? Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of what you've been doing is like build time or deployment time, checking the vulnerabilities. But have you run anything with like during runtime, like you have an agent with your process that's monitoring for traffic? We're starting to look at some tools called shift left, but I'm sure there's a lot of other ones out there. Do you have any experience with those?
Well, like the App Insights will be monitoring the site as it's in production there, and then there's like some of the other tools. I haven't used Shift Left though. It'd be interesting to take a look at that one. Yeah, good question. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, thanks everybody for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.